Welcome back. Tonight, I have 3 scary stories for you. Stories you won't soon forget. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and listen carefully. I never thought a simple ride home could turn into a nightmare. One rainy evening, I was exhausted after a long day at work. I called a taxi to take me home through the quiet downtown streets. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, greeted me with a warm smile. As the taxi moved smoothly along, I stared out the window, lost in thought. Suddenly, I noticed the driver glancing at the rearview mirror more often. His gaze seemed unnervingly fixed, not on the road, but on me. I shifted uncomfortably but shrugged it off, assuming he was just tired. About 10 minutes into the ride, I felt something strange, an icy chill run down my spine. I looked back, and to my surprise, the back seat was empty. I froze, realizing I was alone. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone to call someone, only to find I had no signal. Then I heard a soft whisper right behind me. "You're finally alone with me." I spun around. No one was there. The car suddenly lurched forward, and I looked down to see a note on the seat next to me. "I've been with you all along." The car suddenly stopped in a deserted alley. When I peeked out the window, the driver was gone, and the taxi was empty. Yet, I could hear footsteps approaching from outside. I hastily called 911 and managed to get out. To this day, I have no idea who or what was in that back seat, but I'll never forget the cold presence I felt that night. A seemingly innocent ride turned into a chilling experience I can't forget. One night, I hailed a taxi after a concert. The driver was polite, but something about him felt off, the way he kept glancing at his side mirror too often. I told him my destination, a quiet suburb at the edge of town. He nodded and sped off. As we drove, I received a text message. I glanced at my phone, slightly distracted when I felt the car slow down. I looked up, my stomach sank. The driver was on a deserted stretch of road, far from any streetlights or houses. Before I could say anything, he suddenly turned and said, "You owe me extra for the late trip." I was confused. I hadn't agreed to any extra charges. I tried to open my door, but it was locked. Panicking, I saw a small camera mounted on the dashboard. Then the driver smirked and whispered, "This isn't about a fare. This is about something else." My phone buzzed again, and I saw a photo pop up on the screen of my house with a red circle around my bedroom window. The driver then said, "You've been talking too much about your safety." It's too late now. I managed to shout for help through a crack in the window. Miraculously, a passing car finally noticed and stopped. The driver sped away as I scrambled out. Later, I learned these drivers had been capturing personal info to stalk their victims. That night, I realized I'd been unknowingly targeted, and I still shudder when I think about how close I was to becoming a statistic. I thought I was picking up a regular ride, until I learned it was something else entirely. On a cold winter evening, I flagged down a taxi after a long shift. The driver, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, asked where I was headed. I gave him my address. During the ride, he started asking me odd questions. "Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain?" I thought maybe he was just making conversation, but then he paused, looked at me in the mirror and said, "You're pretty but dangerous. You shouldn't trust strangers." I felt an unease settling deep inside. As we approached my neighborhood, the driver suddenly took a different route, one that led to a secluded forest road. My stomach clenched. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded, voice trembling. He chuckled softly. "Just a detour. To see if you're real." That's when I noticed that the dashboard camera was turned off. My blood ran cold. Something was wrong. I yelled loudly for him to stop, pounding on the window. Miraculously, another car appeared behind us, and the driver in that car flashed his lights. The taxi driver, perhaps realizing he was caught, sped off into the darkness. I ordered an Uber afterwards and never took a taxi in that city again. Months later, I learned that a man matching his description had been involved in several disappearances, always late at night, always in taxis. One night, I picked up what I thought was a regular fare, until it began to speak. It was around midnight when I accepted a ride on a quiet street. The woman in the front seat, dressed in dark clothing, got in silently. She offered no name, no address, just handed me a folded paper with an address. We drove in silence, which was unusual, but I didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes into the ride, I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and she was staring directly at me. "Can you take me somewhere?" "I need to go," she whispered suddenly, voice faint but clear. I asked for clarification, but she only smiled and shook her head. Then she leaned forward and pointed at my dashboard camera. "You should turn that off." Startled, I said I wouldn't. The woman's eyes seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. The strange thing. I could now hear faint whispers coming from her side of the cab, though she hadn't spoken another word. I felt a cold shiver and told her I was pulling over. When I did, she vanished, disappearing into the night like she was never there. Later that evening, I checked the route she gave me, only to find it led to a cemetery, not a residential street. The next day, I learned a new driver had gone missing that same night. I still wonder who or what she was and what she wanted from me. I thought I was just having a lucky night, until it turned into my worst nightmare. That evening, I needed to get home quickly, so I called a well-rated taxi service. The driver, a young man with a friendly face, greeted me warmly. As we drove, he asked about my day, making small talk. When we reached my neighborhood, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. Suddenly, the driver stopped the car in front of an abandoned building. I asked what was happening, but he simply said, "Your destination is here." Alarmed, I insisted I wanted to go home. He smiled strangely, saying, "You're safe with me. Just trust me." I tried to open the door, but it was locked. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "This is your last ride." In a panic, I kicked the door open and ran into the night. Later, I reported him, but the driver disappeared without a trace. Weeks later, I found out that the building was the site of a cold case. Someone believed to have been kidnapped from that very spot years ago. That night, I realized that sometimes the drivers you trust might hide secrets darker than you could ever imagine. If you enjoyed these true scary stories, consider subscribing for more real horror experiences, and don't forget to stay alert, because the next story might just happen to you.